And if you want to do the introductions, Sam, or whatever you want to start out, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to like introduce them one by one? Like
Yeah,
get them to
yeah,
say
yeah.
their names? All right, sure. So we have the medical team, starting with Sam. Not me, Sam. That's Sam.
Yeah.
And then we also have Raj. And then on the medical team as well, we have Harjis, who should be coming shortly.
Okay.
And then on the legal team, we have, oh yeah, sorry. We have Jimmy, Akshayan, and Sahaj. I believe Jimmy and Akshayan are both in here. Let me check that. Akshayan's in here. Yep, Jimmy's in here. And Sahaj is as well. Awesome, great. Their Wi-Fi is working. Then for the ethics team, we have Sana, Gurmahek, and Kieran. And Gurmahek's here. And Sana and Kieran should be coming shortly as well. Yeah, and then for rebuttal, we have Dev, but Dev's Wi-Fi is unfortunately not working, so I might be doing rebuttal today.
Okay, very
All
good.
right.
Okay, Noel, introduce yourself and tell me what you're doing.
I'm doing the medical speech and the rebuttal.
And what's your name?
Oh, I'm Noel.
Thank you, Noel. Okay, and Kelly, could you tell me what you're doing?
I'm doing ethics speech, and I'm Kelly.
Okay, very good. And Matlock, Mackenzie, could you tell us what you're doing?
I'm Mackenzie, and I'm doing the law speech.
Okay, very good. Who's doing the ethics?
That's me.
Do what? Okay, I'll try to figure that out because we're still missing somebody. But let's go ahead with whichever one you want to start with, either medical or law. Sam.
Could we switch it up a little and start with law? Because I think one of our medical people isn't here yet.
Okay,
wait,
fine,
are all of our law people here? Law, no, I think we have less law people here actually.
Let's start medical then.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with medical.
All right, so I'm, other Sam, and so I'll be doing part of the medical part. So MAID allows people suffering from a serious disease or illness to receive medical assistance in dying. To be eligible, patients must experience extreme mental or physical pain from an irreversible illness. They also have to make a voluntary request and give informed consent that can be withdrawn at any time. This means that no person is forced to do this, and they'll be shown all of their alternate options, including palliative care, as part of informed consent. The patient must also be mentally competent both when they make the request and directly prior to receiving the service. This rule protects patients that are not in their right mind and may not understand what they are requesting. The bill also recognizes that some people may be uncomfortable providing this type of service, which is why nobody's required to provide medical assistance in dying. MAID uses a criteria to ensure people can have an early and merciful death if that's what they wish, but is set in a way that will best avoid costing people years that they could have enjoyed. For many people suffering from incurable illnesses, MAID is a peaceful way to die, saving them from unnecessary and often unbearable pain. Whoever's next can go now for medical.
That is Raj.
That'd be me. Okay, anyways, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about euthanasia and how it'll be good, right? So euthanasia is a pathway that people with a serious life-threatening condition can take to ease the pain they may have. This is a solution to help people that do not want to take the pain anymore. They can escape and be free from it, and they can decide if they want to take this option and give the consent to doctors to do so. Consent can only be given under certain criteria and circumstances. And before you give consent, you have to meet certain criteria. And some criteria is you must be at least 18 years old and have mentally competent. That means that you have to be capable of making a healthcare decision for yourself. Making a voluntary request for a medical assistant in dying that does not result of outside pressure or influence. There are also many other criteria, but those are like the main ones. Okay, so it has many requirements, and before you can, you know, take assisted death, right? And you will also have a 10 days before euthanasia can be given, so you can think about your decision, and you may withdraw your consent at any time. Right? In the end, it is your choice to go through with this decision. This is not the only solution, though. There are many other alternative ways, like palliative care, and all in all, euthanasia is a pathway that people should have.
All right, it looks like Harjis is still not here. So Sam, would you like to summarize the points that you had written down?
Sure, just let me. So only nurse practitioners and doctors can provide assistance in dying. It goes one of two ways: medically assisted suicide and clinician administered medical assistance in dying. So only people that meet the requirements that I talked about earlier can be eligible for these services, and they must be eligible for health services funded by the federal government, province, or territory. And there are a few safeguards included to protect the patients and the physicians. That's pretty much it. All right, so I guess we're good for medical then.
Yeah. You guys now have your allotted time for that.
Thank you. Noel?
Yeah. For our medical speech, we're going to look at a study that was published in the Journal of New England Medicine. What are the potential cost savings from legalizing physician-assisted suicide? Speculating about cost savings from physician-assisted suicide, there's a widespread perception that the United States spends an excessive amount on high technology healthcare for dying patients. Many communicators note that 27 to 30% of Medicare budget is spent on the 5% of Medicare patients who die each year. They also note that the expenditures increase exponentially as death approaches. So the last month of life account for 30 to 40% of medical care expenditures in the last year of life to many savings from reduced use. Many have linked the effort to reduce the high cost of death with the legalization of physician-assisted suicide. One commentator observed managed care and managed death through physician-assisted suicide are less expensive than fee-for-service care and extended survival. Less expensive is better. Some of the briefs submitted to the Supreme Court expressed the same logic, decreasing the availability and increasing expense in healthcare, and the uncertain impact managed care may intensify pressure to choose physician-assisted suicide, and the cost effectiveness of hastened death is undeniable as gravity. The earlier a patient dies, the less costly is to his or her care. Indeed, the Supreme Court noted the potential for cost-saving motives to influence the legalization and use physician-assisted suicide, speculating that if physician-assisted suicide were permitted, many might resort to spare their families the substantial financial burden of end-of-life healthcare costs. Factor saving for physician-assisted suicide, computing the likely cost savings from legalization of physician-assisted suicide is based on three factors. One, the number of patients who might commit suicide with the assistance of a physician if it is legalized. Two, the proportion of medical costs that might be saved by the use of physician-assisted suicide, which is related to the amount of time that a patient's life might be shortened. And three, the total cost of medical care for patients who die. Each of these factors are uncertain. The number of patients who might choose physician-assisted suicide. In the Netherlands, approximately 3,100 cases of euthanasia and 550 cases of physician-assisted suicide occur annually, representing 2.3% and 0.4% respectively of all deaths. There are an additional 1,000 cases, 0.7%, in which euthanasia is performed without the patient's explicit current consent. Such cases are neither sanctioned in the Netherlands nor permitted by the current proposal for legalization of physician-assisted suicide in the United States. About 80% of deaths by physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia in the Netherlands involve patients with cancer, representing 6% of all deaths from cancer. The Dutch rates to the United States suggests the approximately 62,000 Americans, 2.7% of the 2.3 million who die in the United States each year, might choose physician-assisted suicide if it were legalized and carried out with the explicit current consent of the patients. Patients with cancer are also likely to be the primary users of physician-assisted suicide in the United States. Proportion of lives shortened by physician-assisted suicide. Although predicting the exact date on which an individual patient will die is impossible, physicians are fairly accurate in predicting the time of death on a population basis, especially for patients who die of cancer. Dutch physicians estimate that 17% of patients receiving euthanasia or a physician's assistance with suicide at the patient's explicit request had their lives shortened by less than 1 day, 42% by 1 day to 1 week, 32% by more than 1 week to 4 weeks, and 9% more than 1 month. Thus, more than 90% of Dutch patients who died as a result of physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia at their own explicit request had their lives shortened by 4 weeks or less, with an average life reduction of less than 3.3 weeks. The medical costs of dying patients, determining the cost of medical care at the end of life and how much would we save by legalizing physician-assisted suicide is made difficult by several problems with this available data. It is speculative to assume that patients who might commit physician-assisted suicide would consume resources at a rate similar to that of patients who do not. Such patients may be considerably different from average descendants in terms of health status, physiology, and characteristics, using more or fewer healthcare resources at the end of life. Also, the best data available in the United States on the cost of medical care at the end of life come from Medicare, which provides mainly acute care for elderly and disabled. Studies have come to various conclusions about whether these Medicare data can be exploited to descendants under 65. According to recent Medicare data for a beneficiary who dies of cancer after receiving conventional care, $30,397 is spent on medical care in the last year of life. Fully 33% of last year's costs, $10,118, are spent in the last month of life, and 48%, $14,507 in the last 2 months of life. Estimated cost savings from legalizing physician-assisted suicide, assuming that 2.7% of patients who die each year, 62,000 Americans, would choose physician-assisted suicide. 2 of these patients would forego an average of 4 weeks of life, and 3, the medical costs in the last month of life of each patient who dies are $10,118. We estimate that the legalizing physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia would save approximately $627 million. This amount is less than the 0.07% of total U.S. Healthcare expenditures.
Is it now time to move to legal?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
All right. So for us, who's first in legal?
All right. So I'll go first. So MAID is proposed to change the criminal code provisions on medical assistance in dying. MAID, the law allows persons who are eligible for the program to be allowed to pursue a painless death, medical assisted death. And we wish to make it eligible to go through with this process, whether death is foreseeable in the future or not. The purpose of MAID is to allow a person who is suffering from an incurable illness or disease to have a choice to put themselves out of the misery. For example, Ernest Fredrickson is a man who was denied MAID by the government as his natural death was not unforeseeable. Doctors have told Ernest that his disease had no more treatments that could be effective. After that, Ernest was forced to sit at home, patiently wait for his natural death, while being in constant pain for more than a decade. His only hope was to end his suffering was the MAID law. And after finding out it was denied, Ernest had wild thoughts to kill himself that very night. When interviewed about his attempt at suicide, Ernest said that, "I could continue living for many, many years. I choose not to. The pain is too much. The only way to end the pain is to die." This is what the man wanted, and unfortunately, he was denied. By setting this rule in place that denies people with non-foreseeable death of the law is restricting the Charter of Freedom of Rights for this person. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of that person, and the right to be deprived thereof, except in ordinance with the principles of fundamental justice. This means that people should have freedom to control over their own lives, to do what they want to do, which is something Ernest and many others were denied. With the amendment to made that allows people to die with having foreseeable death, people such as Ernest can control their lives and keep living the liberty and right to life.
As it is right now, Canada's current maid law is unlawful. The maid law was introduced in June 2016. In the beginning, it was only made available for those whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable, stating that maid is permissible for those who have a serious and incurable illness or a disease or a disability, and those who decline causes them physical or psychological suffering. In February 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that Charter v. Canada parts that of the Criminal Code would need to be changed to satisfy the Charter rights and freedom. On October 5th, 2020, the maid law was reintroduced as maid to amend the criminal code and allow maid for those who wish to pursue a medically assisted death, whether their natural death is reasonably foreseeable or not. The original law was a violation of the Charter Rights and Freedom Equality Rights Section 115. This states every individual is equal before and under the law and has a right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, nation or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. The case in Julia Lamb is a prime example as to why maid law needs to be amended. Julia Lamb is a British Columbia woman who suffers from a spinal muscular disability. At the age of 28, Julia is constantly in wheelchair and requires around-clock care. She feared a future where she would always be trapped in pain and suffering as her disease progressed, but not to the point of death. This made her ineligible for MAID. She was scheduled to go to trial in November, but a few months before the federal government medical expert explained that Miss Lamb would be eligible for MAID because a consensus developed in the medical community that a patient's death does not have to be imminent to count as a reasonably unforeseeable.
All right, so should I go?
Yeah, it's your point.
All right. People should be allowed to choose what they would like to do with their own life. This argues with the fact that women are allowed to conduct abortion, but it is not allowed for some people to go through with what made, because they are allowed to because their death is not foreseeable. The Canadian Nurses Protective Society, also known as CNPS, states that the right to live is not a duty to live, and is threatened by the limitation of MAID and the eligibility process, as it does not allow some individuals to receive the MAID program. Going back to the point of abortion, people should be allowed to choose what they would, if they want to die and when, as women are allowed to choose if they want to abort the child. CNPS states that the limitation on assisted death deprives people of their will to live and makes them want to take their own life. So in conclusion, the changes made in MAID are viable when applied to people who are suffering and want to proceed in medically assisted death. With the death restriction, without restriction of having natural foreseeable death, and that makes infringes upon Section 7 of the Charter, the amendment to MAID, if carried out, will allow for people to have more freedom and make decisions for their own body and have more control over the courses of their own lives.
All right, I believe that's our points for legal. It is your turn now.
Okay, Mackenzie?
Okay. So we will offer reasons why laws should not include euthanasia. Euthanasia is a homicide. In most countries, killing another person is considered murder, even if the intention is to ease the pain, even if the person has a terminal illness. Euthanasia is never necessary, even less since the advent of palliative care is provided by a well-trained team. It helps the patient, his family, and loved ones. Good palliative care is able to control physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and existential suffering. In extreme cases, palliative care sedation is used. It is not only already legal, but effective. Only about 20% of Canada's population has access to palliative care. Euthanasia is incompatible with this. The World Health Organization says that palliative care intends to neither accelerate nor postpone death. 90% of doctors working in palliative care in Canada oppose euthanasia. There has been abuse where euthanasia and assisted suicide are legal. It is impossible to establish guidelines strict enough to limit euthanasia to persons for whom it is provided. In fact, the safeguards provided do not hold up in practice. According to Professor Etienne Montario, Dean of the Faculty of Law of the University of Namur in Belgium, it is extremely difficult to follow strict interpretation of legal requirements once euthanasia is permitted. Right to die implies a duty to kill. The so-called right to die for the patient implies the duty to kill for someone else, in this case, the doctor. This is not the same. The medical personnel who committed euthanasia suffer personal consequences. The act of euthanasia is neither easy nor peaceful. It is a difficult thing to do, and a medical personnel is adversely affected. In Belgium, doctors are entitled to psychotherapy after euthanizing a patient. It is not uncommon to see Belgian nurses take a day off when they know that euthanasia is planned. Euthanasia devalues some lives. All lives matter. Accepting euthanasia means accepting that someone's life, such as elderly or people with disabilities, are worth less than others. Legalizing euthanasia would send a clear message. It is better to be dead than sick or disabled. For a healthy person, it is easy to perceive a life with a disability or an illness as a disaster, full of suffering and frustration. Euthanasia is not in the best interest of the person. It is easy to imagine cases where a patient could request euthanasia freely or under pressure. While it goes against her best interests, the diagnosis is wrong and the patient is not suffering from a terminal illness. The prognosis is wrong and the patient will not die quickly. The patient does not receive good care and suffering could be alleviated. The doctor does not know all the treatment options that could be offered. The request for euthanasia is often a cry for help. The patient is depressed and believes that their situation is worse than it really is. The patient maintains unrealistic fears about possible future pain. Euthanasia may weaken patients. Access to euthanasia could cause an internal conflict for the patient, torn between fear of pain and the desire to continue to live rich moments with his family and loved ones. Thus, in the context of a society open to euthanasia, the patient having difficulty living with a demanding illness would bear an additional burden. Additionally, faced with a doctor who both heals and kills, the patient lives with an uncertainty that adds to her vulnerability. Euthanasia encourages vulnerable people to end their lives. Directly or indirectly, euthanasia imposes many pressures on the elderly and people with disabilities. These pressures stem from family or society. Patients who are ill or dependent often feel worthless and a burden to their family and loved ones. The growing number of cases of abuse or neglect of elderly or those with disabilities illustrates that this is a major issue to consider. Euthanasia is likely to increase the suicide rate. Our society aims to reduce the suicide rate. Quebec even has an annual suicide prevention week, an initiative that some would like to see replicated across Canada. It is important to note that in the US states that have legalized assisted suicide, the rate of non-assisted suicide has increased. Death penalty and euthanasia. Since the abolition of the death penalty in Canada, it is not permitted to cause another person's death. This action is irreversible. Euthanasia would transform hospitals into unsafe places. Many people would hesitate to seek treatment at the hospital. Euthanasia is therefore in contradiction with the demands for dignity and genuine compassion that are at the heart of medicine. Euthanasia is not necessary to avoid heroic measures. The law provides that every patient has the right to refuse treatment or request that ongoing treatment be stopped. Euthanasia will lead to the decline of care for terminally ill people. The Geneva University Hospital reduced its palliative care team after it decided to allow assisted suicide. In the Netherlands, there's a confirmed case of patient euthanized to free up a hospital bed. In Brazil, although euthanasia is legal, a doctor has recently been accused of 7 murders after killing patients in intensive care. An investigation is underway to elucidate 300 other cases of suspicious deaths, probably caused by the same doctor. What would happen if euthanasia was legal? Euthanasia could become an economical method of treating the terminally ill. The cost of poisons used for causing death by euthanasia is about $50 per injection, while chemotherapy treatment costs thousands of dollars. There are few studies and data on the impact of euthanasia on society. We know that euthanasia is increasing in countries that have legalized it. Increase of 18% in the Netherlands in 2011, another 13% increase in 2012. Moreover, according to Lancet, 23% of cases of euthanasia are not reported. Assisted suicides are not included in the reports of euthanasia in the Netherlands, but they account for nearly 6% more deaths. In Oregon, where assisted suicide has been legal since 1997, the number of reports assisted suicides has increased by 306%. But it is impossible to know the real number. One thing is certain, life in society is based on relationships of mutual trust among all citizens. Everyone must be sure that nobody will kill him. We are already witnessing worrisome abuse in jurisdictions where euthanasia or assisted suicide is legal. There's also adverse secondary gains. Many people could push individuals or groups to encourage a patient to request euthanasia. For a government, it could be the desire to reduce healthcare spending, or for a family, desire to do away with guilt or duty to attend the patients. For hires, a rush to enjoy the property bequeathed by a family member. Euthanasia is against the instinct, value, and personal dignity. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees the right to life for every individual. It proclaims fundamental rights of human persons, including respect for his dignity and his value. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities promotes respect for the inherent dignity of persons with disabilities. Human life must be respected regardless of age, gender, race, religion, social status, or potential for success. There's also danger and slope. Voluntary euthanasia puts us at the top of a slippery slope that leads to involuntary euthanasia of people who are considered undesirable. This scenario may seem extreme, but we should remember that ideas that were initially thought impossible and unthinkable can quickly become acceptable. Take the example of Belgium. 10 years after the legalization of euthanasia, the law, which was said to have strong safeguards, was amended to allow euthanasia for children with incurable disease, regardless of their age. That is it.
All right, I believe we move over to Kieran, Gurmahek, and Sana for our ethics speech.
Okay, so today we will be discussing the ethical issues and advantages in relation to euthanasia, otherwise known as medical assistance in dying or MAID in Canada. Medical assistance in dying, as we all know by now, is a choice a terminally ill patient can take to end their life through the help of a doctor. In Canada, this notion is already a law, and it is also a law in a few American states. Moreover, the unavailability of medical assistance in itself is unethical, as patients are under immense pain and stress. They do not have the autonomous decision to choose what happens to their body, and their rights are being infringed. Firstly, a significant challenge that occurs alongside a terminal diagnosis is the emotions of guilt and shame that a patient feels. A patient starts to feel as if they are a burden to their loved ones, and they feel a large sense of guilt that drags their morality. Moreover, considering the patient is terminally ill, they have the added stress of recognizing that their death is imminent. Due to the stress and guilt they feel regularly, those patients tend to push their loved ones away in order to protect them from being hurt by their death. By allowing patients the choice of dying on their own terms, that added stress of imminent yet unknown death is relieved from their shoulders.
Furthermore, it allows them to move through a process of emotional healing that can help everyone, including the patient, push through their guilt and negative feelings. Moreover, from a utilitarian perspective on ethics, it is unethical to not allow patients who are under immense pain and grief to not make their own choice to end their life through euthanasia or medical assistance in dying. Utilitarianism is a theory of morality that advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and opposes actions that cause unhappiness and or harm. Therefore, from a utilitarian perspective, if a patient were to want euthanasia to relinquish their immense pain that causes them unhappiness and harm, then it is unethical to not allow them that ability, especially if the patient themselves states that they will be much happier and relieved to die in a controlled manner rather than letting their disease take control. Therefore, to be ethical from a utilitarian approach, euthanasia laws must be set in place to allow terminally ill patients to relieve themselves of unhappiness and be happy without pain and suffering.
Autonomy is a right to self-determination. It encompasses the idea that an individual should have the freedom to choose what happens to their own body and control their life. An autonomous person is described whose thoughts, words, and actions can be done freely without constraint or coercion by others. Healthcare providers should understand patients' decisions and enforce the provisions of these services. There are ethical principles that guide healthcare professionals in the care of their patients. Principles of respect for patient autonomy, beneficence, and non-malfeasance are articulated in the Canadian Medical Association and the Canadian Nurses Association Code of Ethics. In certain circumstances, healthcare professionals are obliged to bring up MAID as a clinical care option for patients for the sake of their autonomy. MAID allows doctors to fulfill their duties to patients. A good death is one that respects patient autonomy and choice, which serves to protect patient dignity. Patients should be able to control the timing and circumstances of their death, especially if they no longer want to suffer from their illnesses. By providing MAID to alleviate the intolerable physical and psychological suffering of patients, it can be viewed as promoting their well-being and autonomy. Human dignity is understood as an individual's inherent right to self. A common way an individual's basic human dignity is opposed is when healthcare professionals believe that by engaging in MAID, they are violating an individual's basic human dignity by ending their life. To respect a person's autonomy, a person must be given independence in their decisions and actions. It is important that patients have autonomy and control over their end-of-life decisions.
MAID allows for all individuals to access their constitutional rights to medically assisted death, to do so without allowing further delay, which can cause more unnecessary suffering. Allowing MAID protects the life, liberty, and security of every individual under Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. These three acts are in place to protect the basic right and the choice to live, to protect an individual's freedom, to act without restraint, and the right to privacy of the body and health, and of the right protecting the psychological integrity of an individual. MAID ensures that all individuals are allowed to use and practice their rights to life and death, not allowing for patients with terminal illnesses to use medically assisted methods to end their life may encourage patients to look at extreme techniques to end their pain and suffering. Some patients may even look at suicide as the best way to quickly get rid of all pain. Looking at an article written by Daniel McFarland, a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and several other doctors, states that there are statistics that prove that cancer patients have nearly twice the incidence of suicide than the general population. Up to 8.5% of the terminally ill cancer patients express a sustained and persuasive wish for an early death. One survey was conducted where 10% of terminally ill patients reported seriously pursuing medically assisted death. Patients with terminal illnesses rely on MAID to ensure that they do not have to use suicide as a method to end their suffering if there are no other possible methods. As statistics show that there is double of the amount of individuals that committed suicide who had an illness and did not have access to MAID than any individual without any illness. Not allowing MAID, which is a choice that a patient can make to end their life through the help of a doctor, is unethical. This notion is already in place in some states in America and in Canada. Not allowing MAID in itself is unethical, as patients that are facing immense pain and stress are denied the right to choose what happens to them, which can cause them to look at extreme measures to end their suffering. and is overall causing their rights to be infringed.
All right. Now for the ethics speech from you guys.
Okay. Kelly?
The ethical issues, because I believe in G.K. Chesterton when he said, think of all of those ages through which men have had the courage to die, and then remember that we have actually fallen to talking about having the courage to live. We must negate today's resolution. The Canadian standard for medical assistance and dying is a good thing. In today's debate, we need to define the standard as something established by authority, custom, or general consent as a model. Example or point of reference, the standard of the reasonable person. Good to be desired or approved of. Today, we could stop the debate right there. We have automatically won. If the death was actually desired, you would not need a doctor to assist you. If the society prefers death over life, then that society dies and we would not be here. Proponents of euthanasia and physician-assisted death often focus on autonomy. When you consider who is the best person, place, or thing to make an informed decision about how to end your life, I don't think it's the state's decision. I don't think it's a religious body's decision. I think it's an individual decision, says Wanda Morris, CEO of Dying Committee, that's connected to withholding and withdrawing treatment. Some arguments that we allow people to refuse treatment when the known consequence is death, and there isn't a defensible basis for drawing a distinction between withholding and withdrawal on the one hand and assisted suicide and euthanasia on the other, says Jocelyn Downey, a law professor at the Dalhousie University. She sees assisted dying as a spectrum without withholding or withdrawal on one end and euthanasia at the other. I think physician-assisted death and euthanasia is an important option that should be available to all Canadians, says James Donwar, critical care and palliative care staff physician at the Toronto General Hospital. I think it's important to recognize that there are types of suffering that we do not have the ability to treat. There are dying patients who have a very low quality of life from their perspective, and sometimes only death will end their suffering. On the other side, a common concern shared by my teammates as well, and that make the CMA makes, is that the slippery slope argument. It's the concern that vulnerable people may feel pressured into deciding to end their lives, but evidence from other jurisdictions provides a counterpoint. In none of these jurisdictions that have decriminalized physician-assisted death would you find any threat to people who are vulnerable, says Schnooklik, pointing out that in European countries, the average person who uses these programs is male with middle to upper class income and education. By any stretch of the imagination, this is not what we would understand commonly as vulnerable people. He says in Switzerland, people who choose assisted death are more likely to have education, live in urban areas, and have a higher social economic status. A study of those who participated in the Death with Dignity program at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance found the average participant white, male, and well-educated. Now, with all these facts, who would want to kill themselves? Not me. No way. Ethically, we should kill people because they feel like they want to leave this earth. Is that what our society has come to today? Other things, physician-assisted death demeans the disabled. The most commonly requested reason for it is not pain, but disability, which is really concerning, says Margaret Cottle, Vice President of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. This is saying disability equals indignity, and what does that say to the rest of our citizens who are living with disability? The keyword is living. Yes, they're living. Life is precious, and life is a gift, not from ourselves, but for ourselves. The most common reasons people in the Seattle Death with Dignity program gave for wanting to die was loss of autonomy, inability to engage in enjoyable activities, and loss of dignity. Similarly, of the 72 people who received a prescription for the lethal medication in Washington State in 2010, were worried about losing their autonomy, and 64 about losing their dignity. Jessica Simon, head of the Division of Palliative Care Medicine at the University of Calgary, is also concerned about those reasons. I worry that people fear dependency. She says the act of dying, by definition, is a time when we become dependent on others, and I think it's much more important that we develop ways to support people through that dependency than seeking to quickly dispose of that time. The impact of palliative care doctors, including Bernard Lapointe, Manuel Burrode, and Beaufort Mount, have come out against Quebec's legislation, saying most palliative care doctors are against it and that it blurs the line between palliative care and euthanasia. I think that I don't really have a good grasp on what the difference is between palliative care, palliative sedation, physician-assisted death, and euthanasia, says Dory Sakaria, a palliative care doctor at Sunnybrook. I think people are voting for help me when I'm suffering. I want to make sure there are as many options as possible when I'm suffering. And if palliative care isn't an option, we worry that people are going to vote for euthanasia or physician-assisted death because they think that's all there to help them. There's also the fear that euthanasia and physician-assisted death will distract from the need for more palliative care in Canada. To counter this, many jurisdictions have addressed end-of-life care as a whole when legalizing physician-assisted death. In Quebec, the new legislation includes the right to palliative care that would be more difficult to execute if legalization across Canada comes from the Supreme Court, since palliative care is provincial jurisdiction. In palliative care, doctors believe continuous palliative sedation therapy, where a patient is sedated for the last few days or weeks of life, is an option that removes the fear and pain of dying for most people. Butchman remembers a patient who had ALS and requested he hasten death after she was locked in, unable to communicate or move in any way. While remaining aware, they decided to use the continuous palliative sedation therapy where she was at the end of her life. And when she requested it by blinking twice, Butchman feels that she had a comfortable, peaceful death. But if she would have the option to hasten death, she probably would have taken it, he says. And some worry physician-assisted death would erode trust in palliative care doctors, introducing the idea that a physician can care for you when you're dying but can also hasten your death, changing the fundamental relationship between physicians and patients. Since the University of Calgary, Simon, Dr. Lowe's wife, Maureen Taylor, said she had an excellent palliative care, but it wasn't enough. He ended his life sedated at home. I slept next to my husband for 8 days while he was basically in a coma. He couldn't feel pain, he couldn't feel hunger, but he also couldn't talk to his family. He had to be diapered, which was something he never wanted. It was like a living corpse in your house, she says, adding that watching him gasp for air under sedation was awful for the family. I'd turn it around and ask who benefited from Don having to live the last 2 weeks of his life like that. Butchman thinks Canadians need to have more thorough discussion about palliative care and death before deciding that if physician-assisted death is a good thing or not. With this choice, there is only one choice in today's round: vote for life, vote for con.
All right. Since we went first, would you guys allow us to go last for the rebuttal?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Okay, go ahead with the rebuttal, Noel.
All right. One, euthanasia will make compassionate care suffer greatly. This is a clear distinction between a physician allowing a terminally ill person to decline treatment and to die in natural course of his or her terminal illness on one hand, and a physician prescribing PAS or PAD on the other, when care is appropriately withdrawn, the course of the terminal illness is the cause of death. If a medication is prescribed to cause death, the prescription is the cause of death. In the care of terminally ill persons, appropriate withdrawal of care is openly and widely practiced in the United States without a need for PAS or PAD. Hospice care and palliative care have disseminated widely over the past 3 decades. Advanced care planning and do not associate orders and available in all states. They have become the standards of care in the United States, allowing a terminally ill person to decline treatment and die in the natural course of his or her with excellent symptom controls occurs routinely in homes, nursing homes, and hospitals across the United States. None of this requires PAS or PAD, allowing a terminally ill person to decline unwanted burdensome treatment, to decline cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and to decline a mechanical ventilation is consistent with the highest standards of excellent medical care and is the standard of care in the United States. There is an overwhelmingly consensus of the medical profession to protect people with serious illness from unwanted intervention, continued interrogation of palliative care into oncology care, initiatives to improve physician-patient communication, wider adoption of advanced directives, and scrupulous attention to symptom control are widely endorsed. None of this requires PAS or PAD. As stated before, extreme autonomy, the desire of terminally ill person to control the timing and circumstances of death is a theme in the reported experience of PAS, PAD in Washington and Oregon. The Seattle Cancer Care Alliance described 114 persons requesting information about PAS, PAD under Washington statute and indicated that specialized care for pain and palliative care services were available, but invoked infrequently for death with dignity patients, perhaps because the participants typically do not have symptoms at the time of the request. The most common reasons for wanting to participate, given by 36 participants in PAS, PAD at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, were loss of autonomy, inability to engage in enjoyable activities, and loss of dignity. And consequences, PAS and PAD is fundamentally inconsistent with the physician's role as a professional and trusted healer. The physician's professional role is to use his or her knowledge, insight, and healing skills to aid the patient, not to kill the patient. For example, an order for PAD is profoundly different from an order for chemotherapy. The latter requires specific professional training and expertise. Is collaborated for the particular illness and circumstances of the patient and has uncertain toxicity that both the physician and the patient seek to minimize. Providing PAD requires much less expertise. It is one size fits all, and all toxicity is grade 5. Another example is pain relief, a medication administered to palliate symptoms that inadvertently cause death is ethical and is profoundly different from a prescription designed to bring about death. The former is care for the living patient, and the latter removes the patient from the world of living. The physician should not prescribe PAD because a patient asks for it. Rather, the physician's constitutive professional role is to attend those who are sick and debilitated, seeking to preserve the measure of health that can be preserved and to help them bear pain and progressive loss of autonomy and bodily function that illness often brings. The physician looking to cure, sometimes to relieve, often to console, always is attributed to Edward Livingston Trudeau, MD, who was the founder of the Adirondack Cottage Sanitarium for tuberculosis in the village of Saranac Lake, New York. It is applicable to oncology and the care of patients with advanced cancer and other terminal illnesses today as it was in the 1800s. If physicians accept the role of being the agents of PAD, they set themselves up for becoming mere providers of services on demand. Oncologists are advocates for patients living with cancer. The lethality of cancer, the stigma of cancer, and the high cost of cancer care are already challenged. That advocacy, the oncologist's duty to patients with advanced terminal cancer is to deal with extreme distress, to advise against harmful choices, to mobilize needed resources, to overcome barriers, and to provide dependable care with continuing support for patients and caregivers. In short, the professional duty is to cure, sometimes relieve often, and to console always. Terminally ill patients with cancer need from their clinicians unwavering support for physiosocial needs throughout the natural course of their terminal illness rather than the options of PAD. Words have consequences and laws have greater consequences. Legalizing PAD may give peace of mind to a few people with the terminal illness who may be unaware of the resources available to them, but it has huge negative implications and consequences to many who offer from terminal illnesses and physicians who care for them. Cancer's clinicians will do well to avoid the seduction of PAS/PAD to maintain their professionalism and to protect their patients with cancer by rejecting PAS/PAD in clinical practice, in statute, and in policy. Thank you.
All right. So in conclusion, we have been giving patients a dichotomy. We have told them that they either suffer and then die of their disease, or that they take their own life without dignity and on their own terms. What we must do is we must give them the option to take their lives with dignity. We must give them the option to liberate themselves from pain. Because if we don't, we are giving them a duty to live and a duty to feel pain, which is not what we ought to be doing. With strict laws in place, those who rightfully want and deserve euthanasia will receive it. it is not for us to choose for them what to do with their body. Now, with patients having multiple opportunities to back out of MAID right up until the last second, no one will be forced to die against their wishes. And with multiple nurses and doctors evaluating their patient's state, we can rest assured that no one will lose their life just because of a faulty diagnosis. Neither will there be any sort of monetary or property gain from the doctors or the families through checks to ensure that there's no benefit to the doctors from the patient's death. At the end of the day, euthanasia is what patients need right now. Their pain can be unbearable, and we need to answer their cries for liberation. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and do our reflection part. Sam, what'd you learn from doing this?
I learned particularly in the legal area how euthanasia works. I myself am very much for euthanasia. I think it's just an imperative that we allow people to die with dignity and we allow them to express self-governance over their body. But I never knew how difficult it was to get it right legally, to try and draw that line in a place where it needs to be drawn, to make sure that it's being done appropriately. Like you guys brought up the Netherlands, and I saw a lot of research there talking about how they do it, where they have a little bit looser of a system than MAID, and how MAID is seen sort of by palliative care doctors and how it interacts with that, and trying to make sure that MAID is some sort of an option that doesn't get in the way of palliative care or doesn't hurt it.
Okay. Why don't you ask your people, and then we'll go ahead to our people and see what they learned.
Oh yeah, sure. Anybody here want to say something that they learned?
I can go. So I did the medical side, so I learned a lot about the illnesses that might lead up to someone making this decision and kind of like how it affects them. So I learned for a lot of people, it's like a comfort for them to have it there, just as an option, even though like Sam said, like not getting in the way of palliative, I can't say that word, care, because they have that option as well. So I just learned a lot about the medical side of it.
All right.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
No,
I
in
was
the
just
law
gonna...
class, we did talk about Bill C7, and I'm not sure if you guys know about it, but it's literally just MAID, and if it's like, but it's like Canada based, and like the other groups did present a lot of like information in the class, and this just like sort of like this debate just sort of like made it more clear about like the different like ways people see things, and obviously about how like doctors are now affected, and like how many of the doctors go through like treatment afterwards or beforehand, just because like they're killing someone, and how might like it may affect them. Like, that's kind of it.
All right. Anyone else?
Well, I like for this debate in particular, I already knew a lot about this stuff because I was in Gurmahek's class, and I actually did the debate about the MAID law that Canada's enforcing. And so actually there's a bill, the bill that I debated was Bill C7, and it would basically mean that Canada would take out the condition for MAID to be eligible for only people who have a foreseeable death. So what Canada's planning to do is anybody, even if they don't have a foreseeable death, they'll be allowed for MAID with, the other restrictions and safeguards that are there. So in this debate, I kind of learned more on like the personal stories that people had with like palliative care and like MAID in general, and like just like the stories people had with terminal illness and how that affects them mentally, and how the doctors are also like, I think somebody brought up the Netherlands and how, no, it was Belgium. And they said how like nurses and doctors take breaks on the days that they know that somebody's going to die from euthanasia. So I like to hear like the personal stories about the people.
All right. Unless anyone else from my side has something they want to share, you guys can go ahead.
Okay, Noel, go ahead. What'd you learn?
Yeah, I just learned that a good amount of countries actually allow this, and a good amount of people choose to use euthanasia to get assisted death, either from any kind of pain. And yeah, I just learned that basically if they just think the pain's too much, they can choose to have assisted death. Yeah, it's just interesting. Honestly, I didn't think something like this like would be legal in places, because it's just kind of a legal way to kill yourself in a sense. But I could see why people would choose it, and I mean, it just opens up your eyes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mackenzie.
I feel like I learned a lot from like the medical point of view. I found many of the statements that you guys made really interesting, but also because this is like my first debate that I've participated in, it just kind of taught me like the structure of how debates work. And I want to apologize if I stuttered too much, because I feel like I did, but it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Kelly.
I think overall I was able to like gain a better understanding of what this is, because I've rarely heard of it. So I was able to learn, on the medical side and the ethical side, and overall everything that happens through this and the process that people have to go through. So it's definitely, like Noelle said, eye-opening, and I'm glad I got to, I guess, learn more about it and what it's about.
Okay. I appreciate that. I want to comment one thing. I find it kind of interesting that a society that starts devaluing life will eventually dissipate itself. So, I hope we're not going down into that run when especially when you're talking about MAID, and if they end up taking out foreseeable death, there's some real issues, especially with that Rodriguez case. When the first Supreme Court ruling heard it, I think in that, Sam, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I understood in that one that they ruled 5-4 in the favor of in favor of British Columbia. I think it is. It was she was suing. She was a lady with ALS, that they were trying to say that they ruled because life is in your constitution, that they couldn't actually approve a death. Is that correct?
So I'm going to defer to the people who have taken law more recently than I have. But what I remember from that is that I think there were two cases around that. And then the first one they denied her. And then the second one, I believe, she got the right to. And I don't know if they were in the same court. Do you guys know anything about that?
Now, the first one, and then they revisited it several years later, and they had a different argument. So it was different arguments, but the first time they did it, and the ruling was in favor of British Columbia, was because they said there's a right to life in the Constitution of Canada, or the Charter of Canada. I didn't know that. I did not know that. In the United States, we have no right to life in our Constitution. We have the right to life in the Declaration of Independence, which does not have any laws, is what I'm saying. So that would be a barrier in which it would be difficult for anybody to pass unless they change what life is. So I thought that would be kind of interesting. It's very hard to try to put some of these things, because it's very difficult when you have to go through that type and make a decision. And then eventually, who's to say, when you euthanize an animal, and that's quite common practice here in the States, you have really bad emotions when you have a pet for 15, 16 years and you have to euthanize it. How do the people feel afterwards? It's a complicated issue. I appreciate you guys taking time to look at it. We were going to try to suggest something here, and I talked to Clayton and you guys at the same time. We wanted to try to see about spreading this out with a couple other schools, a school in Taiwan and a school in Turkey, and try to have a deal where we have a topic, but then the school have to do both sides. One group would do one side, another group would do the other side, and you could actually get to see, if we did 4 schools, you could see 3 different points of view, or maybe let's say we did 2 schools, but you could see you'd have to end up having to look at argue both sides. What do you think?
That certainly seems interesting. Yeah. If you when you develop that, I'd like to get emails about it. Just to
our topic next month, I think we're going to talk about online learning, which is really going to be, I think, a big issue in the future because we're in this hybrid model in which I'm here and everybody's home. Clayton's at a model where you guys are there and that. Do you feel like for the last year or how long you ever been doing this, that you're getting the same type of education?
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, for me, my grades have been going up, so I don't know.
No, it's not the same education.
Grades and learning are two separate things, though, Sam.
It's not the same
true.
thing.
That is true.
We are there's huge gaps. Our kids who did schooling from March till June last year learned very little, and a lot of them unfortunately came into this year with these big gaps, and the gaps are just perpetrating throughout the remainder of the quad. For the grade 12s, they're done. They're going to go to university, and a lot of them are going to be hurt because the universities aren't slowing down. They're assuming that they have the same knowledge. Our kids who are in grade 10 and 11, a lot of them don't have, I'm talking about science specifically, don't have a lot of the basic skills. And so for the most part, we've taken out about 20% of the content just to deal with the shortened timelines that we have. But there's by no close stretch are we doing anything the same as what we did in a regular classroom.
Yeah,
a lot of students are experiencing success in a sense because there's a lot more compassion in the assessment. There's a lot of language and rhetoric around the idea that this is not normal. So, if a student is kind of waffling between not understanding and understanding when you give them a grade or an evaluation based on their not understanding, there's a lot more compassion in the grading. So in many cases, the grading is higher. There's individuals who love the environment, who excel in the environment, they're independent and they're doing well. But when you talk about the majority of students who are kind of in that, 70 and down, it's a real struggle for them.
Yeah.
For all those kids.
I wanted to try to tell you, we're going to try to get you to do something with a school in Taiwan. They've only missed 2 weeks of school in the last year. And, they think online learning is great. You guys could come from a different perspective as well. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure in our case what's going on because we have a lot of people with language issues too, that English isn't their first language. And you have a tremendous issue when it comes to that as well.
I think we've got a debate on March 1st with a school from Brazil. Oh, wow. And then maybe after that, depending on who we have, we could engage with Taiwan or Turkey.
Okay.
But yeah, I wonder subject-wise how that online learning thing is affecting people. Because I know in science, it's there's such a width of knowledge that you have to get. But in something like English or like a social science, it feels like a very different experience.
Well, you're probably right. I don't see how you can do science labs a whole lot, online as much as you can do different things. But we've taken a hiatus in a lot of areas, and the kids could probably tell you the same, is that they may not be as engaged no matter what. And some people actually like it much better. So it's, I think Clayton hit the nail on the head. It's a very spotty deal, but there's many more people that aren't doing as well as people are doing better. And it's going to be really bad, but not every country is in the same shape we're in. That's the situation, which I find it really hard to believe. They just shut down for 7 days in Taiwan in the last year. And they've had everything else been full blast. So, they look at us like we're kind of crazy. Of course, that's
those sort of places.
Okay.
Where they take that really aggressive, quick approach.
Oh, yeah. We really appreciate today, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah. You as well. All right, guys. We're just gonna disperse from here, I think. If that's all right with you guys.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. See you next
time. All right. See you next week at the regular time. That's the people from